Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am for you to hear from today's guest. His name is Jesse Brisendine, and he's a human excellence coach. Yep, you heard that right. Jesse is all about helping people realize their full potential and reach extraordinary levels of excellence. Jesse and I met in a business mastermind a few years ago, and we stayed connected on social media. And during that time, I've watched how he has demonstrated positive leadership over and over again in all facets of his life. And so I knew I just had to have him on the show because he has so much knowledge and expertise to share with us. So let me tell you a little bit about Jesse, and then we'll get into what I promise is going to be a terrific conversation, chock full of actionable wisdom. And in fact, we had to just decide to start recording because we were having such a good conversation before we actually started recording. So here we are, finally. So Jesse Brisendine is the creator of Zero Limits Coaching, and he's a world-renowned expert who works with individuals and organizations to move beyond their limitations and unlock their greatness. Business leaders, Hollywood celebrities, entrepreneurs, medical professionals, and educators have utilized Jesse's services to break through their limiting beliefs, uncover their unique purpose, and build thriving businesses and fulfilling lives. Jesse is a big fan of buffets, professional wrestling, and finding the silver lining in any situation. And that last point about finding the silver lining, I think that is one of the reasons that I am such a big fan of his. So welcome to the show, Jesse. It's so great to have you here.
Alex, it's so great to be here, and congratulations on 49 episodes. That's incredible.
We're getting there, almost at a year.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And it really is an honor to have you here today. So just to get us started, I ask all my guests this crucial first question because, hey, it's the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. So what does positive leadership mean to you, Jesse?
Alex, I appreciate this question, and I also appreciate you giving me permission beforehand to change my answer. Just full disclosure to everyone, I sent Alex an answer earlier in the week that I thought about for 15 minutes. I sent it to her, and then after I sent it to her, I thought about it for another 2 hours that I probably should have said it a little bit differently. And what I'm about to say now, because Alex graciously gave me permission to just kind of feel what it felt like, is going to be something completely different than it's. And what I really feel in this moment, Alex, positive leadership is it's doing the right thing, especially when the right thing seems hard. I think positive leadership is doing the right thing, especially when the right thing seems hard, and you inspire others to do the right thing, especially when the right thing seems hard.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're so spot on. I mean, I think that's like a core facet of positive leadership is doing sort of the right and virtuous thing. So tell me more about that. I mean, because I know you're a big believer in you should always do the right thing. Like you just said, you should always do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing to do. So like expand a little bit more on that in terms of what do you mean? And like, why is it so important to choose the right thing to do always?
Yeah, I think, Alex, when we look at the right thing, I think we need to define what the right thing is first, because the right thing, oftentimes I think, especially in the business place, we always look for our metrics, right? How do we quantify and qualify these types of things? Right. And when we're looking at a bottom line type decision, the right thing seems very black and white or black and red, right? We have P&Ls that we can look at, and it makes it a very cut and dry thing. Where I'm really wildly curious right now is where we go a layer deeper to that with the right thing, in terms of maybe it doesn't make sense on the balance sheet. Maybe it just doesn't make sense in the scope of where the immediate focus is right now, but something in our gut tells us that if we do this now, this is the right thing, and we do it in the trust that it's going to evolve and positively advance the culture, the community, the connections that we have with one another. You know, an example of this comes to mind, and I'm blanking on the name, but Simon Sinek in one of his books talks about it, and he actually talks about in his talk where back in 2008, when the balloon bubble burst or whatever they called it, and all that stuff happened, there was a company down in the South, and they were largely in, I think, manufacturing and textiles. And at a time when everybody would immediately go to looking at, okay, what are our numbers? And we got to start trimming people away, fire, laying off, because that's the only way we're going to stay positive or cash positive. This company looked at it from a different way. And the leader immediately looked at it and said, not based off of the money, but based off the people. What do we need to do to keep every single person employed and have a job through this? Now, that's a tough decision, right? Especially if you're a publicly traded company and you have shareholders to answer to, and you have all this pressure coming on, and the easiest immediate thing to do, and it may seem like the right thing, is to cut losses, start trimming the fat, so to speak. But they asked a different question. They thought people first instead of profit. They have a company too of several thousand people, and what they came up with was this: the leadership team immediately took a massive salary cut. I think the founder and CEO took his salary down from a high six-figure salary to, I think he was only giving himself a few dollars, if that. And then they set up a strategy amongst the employees where everybody agreed to take a mandatory 2-week vacation, not paid, but 2-week vacation. And then they would do some reduced hours and those types of things. And then what would happen was the people who were a little bit financially well off, they had a bit more savings, they had a bit better advancement, they would trade vacation times out with people who were a little tighter on cash. So they would take 3 weeks off, and then the other one would only take 1, and so on. And they did this to ride out the storm for however long it was, a year, 16, 18 months. And in that time, not one person, and I think everybody had to take a small salary cut too, but not one person was let go. Everybody was able to stay at work. Everybody was able to grow, and then the company was able to resume its growth and become more profitable afterwards. But what was really, really powerful in that process was that every single person in that organization formed a deeper level of trust, formed a deeper level of connection. And all of a sudden, this evolution happened where it went from employees and coworkers to friends and family. They realized now that when they were in the trenches, which they were, that the person who was on their shoulder was truly going to have their back. There was never going to be no backstabbing. Nobody was going to be advocating for one or the other and why they're more important and more of an asset. But they stuck it out together, and they banded together. And I think that is the essence of making that right decision, because it doesn't seem in the initial look that it may be the right one. But the long-term play with that, when you're playing that long game, it's going to yield all the positive metrics that you can imagine.
Exactly. Oh, I love that story. And actually, I think Southwest is known for that too. Like in the wake of 9/11, they committed to, we're not going to lay off anybody, right? And they took different measures like you're describing. So yeah, there's different examples of this. And I think you brought it back around. See, the interesting thing about this is when you do the right thing, and sort of as you defined it there, it's the right thing in terms of people, right? When we put people first, actually our profits take care of themselves, because at the very end of that story, you made the point that, which is so true, which is, guess what? After the company made the commitment to those employees and showed them that they were committed to keeping them and making this work, I mean, what is the employee commitment then in the future? It's huge, right? Like those employees are not walking away. They are in it, and they are going to bat for you with whatever, comes up. I mean, as you said, like it's such a cohesive team. They become this team and family. And now moving forward, it's like a well-oiled machine almost of like everybody's working together, everybody's performing better, everybody's more committed. And that creates this upward spiral that ultimately, once you ride out that short-term bumpiness,
Yes.
it's just like keep going and the profits start to come back, right? So it's almost like that, what looks like a short-term right play in terms of the finances, actually, like you said, it's about thinking about the long game here and thinking about, okay, it's our people first. And that if we take care of them, the profits will take care of themselves.
And Alex, you mentioned that performing piece, and I think that's so important to draw a little extra attention to that. In corporate America, right, depending on which studies you look at, but we see all sorts of studies on productivity and how an average worker clocks in for 8 hours, but maybe you're only getting 4 hours and 35 minutes of productivity out of them or something like that.
Yeah.
And we know they're on digital, they're doing this, they're doing that. I can't tell you how many messages from people I get when they're supposed to be at work and I'm like, what in the hell are you doing right now? And what happens then in this dynamic is just, it's that productivity changes because you're no longer clocking into a job, you're going in to support your friends and family.
Right.
There's a much psychology, right? You're not dragging yourself out of bed to go to work. You're showing up because there's somebody you care about there.
Yeah.
You think about the psychology shift in that, right? Think about the psychology shift in someone who is forced to sacrifice when they don't want to. What do they feel like? Imagine their body language, imagine their posture, imagine their attitude. Probably not great. But imagine when that becomes the mantra of the team, that we're not sacrificing for ourselves, we're sacrificing for each other. I'm giving up because I believe in Alex. I'm going to go without this for a little bit because I'm committed to making sure that she doesn't have to go without that.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different psychology. It's a whole different dynamic that comes into place. And it's something that I think that one of the keys for companies that they're missing out is the culture piece. And a lot of times, you see survey after survey that comes out and sees this massive disconnect where employees will routinely say the top 10 things that they value most. Number one is always appreciation. I mean, and it's dramatic. It's like 43%. The next one's like 20 something percent. So it's a huge 2-to-1 report towards appreciation.
Yep.
And then in management and leadership, they think they value appreciation like number 8 or 9. So there's this massive disconnect of what people really are looking for and what leadership sometimes think that they need or want. And why this became such a successful model is because they looked at that people piece first, exactly as they said. They thought people first. When people make products, people make possibilities. It's the lifeblood. They're our story.
Yeah, exactly. And we see some of these stories even happening now with the pandemic. I mean, it has really challenged all sizes of business, certainly small businesses more so than big ones, but hey, we've seen some big ones really be really challenged too. I mean, I think Lord and Taylor are shutting their doors just shy of 200 years in business, right? I mean,
Wow.
There's a lot of strain on business at the moment. So like when you think about this, doing the right thing, how does it translate to this current COVID world or even this post-COVID world in terms of like, what do leaders need to do differently, or maybe it's skills that they need to develop? Like, what are you seeing out there? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think, Alex, you're going to see an evolution of currency in the corporate culture. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a higher value on emotional currency than there has been in the past. I think that what we're going to start to see and want in leaders is attributes that we may not have attributed to leadership before. Things like compassion, courage, vulnerability, integrity, alignment, authenticity. The alignment piece, especially with, we've all been in those organizations before where we walk in and we see the core values beautifully displayed on the wall. And then if you sit down and you actually talk with the folks who work there and you have the question, what are your core values? It's that awkward crickets chirping noise, or they might do a dry resuscitation of it, but haven't really taken pause in consideration of what those actually mean to them. I think that whereas that was a luxury to get by before, I think now it's going to become a necessity for leaders to actually embody them. If your core value is fun, a leader is going to need to be fun. If your core value is trust and compassion, you're going to need a leader that cares, cares enough to look the human being in the eye when they come in and say, how are you doing? And not saying it just because it's not the grocery counter exchange that we have where it's, so how are you doing? Good. How are you doing? Good. And we know that one person's not good in that exchange, but we just go on our way. It's going to be really looking them in the eye and seeing the human being there. It's going to be letting that person know that they care. And I think I just finished reading this book, and the author used to, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he used to run a lot of the ABC programming and was producing at Good Morning America. And there was an anchor that he was trying to get from NBC to come over. And she was a really successful anchor. And tragically, she died 3 years later after this time in a car accident. He gets a phone call from someone and they're asking, hey, we want to interview you about her. And he said, well, I never got to meet her. Her contract was ironclad. I couldn't talk with her. And they go, well, that seems weird because she mentions you in your autobiography. He said, what? He picks up the book and he goes on to read this section where when she was very young in journalism and just getting going, she was on the radio and trying to get an interview at the big time. Everybody kept telling her, no, no, no. And then all of a sudden she gets a letter back in the days before email. She gets a letter from this producer for a radio station in Boston saying, if you're ever in the Boston, the station, stop by. We'd love to talk with you. She gets a friend to drive her up there next day and she walks through and has an interview. And wouldn't you know, it's this guy, but 20 years before their paths would cross again. And she goes to write in the autobiography that he walks her around, talks about how tough the industry is to break into, all these types of things, spends the time with her, showing her the studio, answers all of her questions. And when she goes home and her friend asks, did you get the job? How did it go? She said, it went great. And he said, well, did you get the job? And she says, well, no. And he goes, well, how did it go great if you didn't get the job? And she goes, he took me seriously. He took me seriously. And I think there in itself is a demonstration of that value in leadership, right? It's really taking the time to see that person. It's, it's no longer, I think, will we be able to get away with the conversation where I'm talking to you and I'm texting at the same time. And we're going to able to quantify that as a genuine exchange.
Right.
We know that when the device is up, what you're really saying to me is, what you have to say is not that important. And I think those are going to be things that we'll see place a much higher value. And if we embrace those things as leaders, I think we'll see all of our metrics improve dramatically.
Oh, amen. And, I think the other takeaway that I'm in my mind from that story, which was very compelling, by the way, I want to know what that book is when you remember, is it's such a great reminder that as leaders, we have an enormous impact on people, even when we don't realize it. And that's what we've got to become more mindful of is, being in a leadership position means that you have a privileged position where you are influencing hearts and minds and lives every day, even when you don't understand that you are. And so it's about being more, like you said, be more attentive, listen to people, take them seriously, value human beings, because, hey, this guy didn't even remember that he had the interaction with that reporter early on in her career. But guess what? She did. She remembered it 20 years later. He didn't give her the job, but he took her seriously and she never forgot it. And it's such a reminder that I'm going to butcher it, but it's Maya Angelou's saying about, people don't care what you know and they won't remember it. They'll remember how you made them feel. Right. And I think that's also a key piece of that is like, as leaders, we have to be mindful of how we're making people feel around us.
Yeah, it's that influence piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
We hold such a privileged position of influence.
Yep.
And you're going to influence a person one way or another. So why not influence them in a way where you leave them feeling incredibly empowered by themselves and with the belief that they can do anything. And if you're willing to use the privilege of influence that way, there's zero limits for what you can do. There really is zero limits for what you can do and what you and your team can accomplish as an organization.
Yeah. And I think, if you're listening to this and saying, well, gee, that's all really nice. It's a really nice concept. Like, how do I actually manage to do that? It's like, just pause and think about you know, how do I want this person to remember me? If they were going to, if I could be a fly on the wall and just eavesdropping on this person going home to their spouse, their partner, or whatever, and talking about, you know, how did the meeting go, just as that reporter did, what would I like that person to be saying about me? Right. And that's not about, you know, oh, we've got to get into some personality context. We need a contest. We need the person to go home and think, you know, we're their best friend and we're really cool. No, it's like, I mean, that woman went home and said, no, I didn't get the job. And her partner was like, well, then how is it so great? But to her, it had been huge because for the first time she had been taken seriously. Right. And so that's, I mean, as he read that, the ABC producer, as he read that in hindsight, I bet he was like, wow, I didn't even realize I was taking her seriously. It's just who I am. But boy, it's great to be remembered that way. Right?
Yeah. He said he started crying. He said he started crying too, because for him, it became aware of this thing he had been doing intentionally for so long. You know, and those things, we don't often get the pat on the back with that. But you'll notice in her autobiography, she's not talking anything about the contract she landed, the deal she got, all those types of things. The things that meant the most to her, which ultimately defined the path she went on, was those types of things.
Yeah, right? Exactly. How the people you interact with, how they treat you. Yeah, it's everything. Yeah. It's absolutely everything. So you mentioned something else when you were talking about this in terms of leaders just having this emotional currency. You mentioned vulnerability, and actually we were talking about it just before the show. And I feel like, you know, Brene Brown is out there a lot talking about it, but I don't hear vulnerability being spoken about a whole lot other than that. And especially coming from male leaders like yourself. So, you know, can you unpack that a little bit for us and tell us why you think vulnerability is a key component in this sort of new post-COVID leadership skill set?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And I think this is one of those things that we have this incredible opportunity right now, and perhaps COVID has accelerated it for us, where we can start to sift through some of the BS that we've been telling ourselves for so long and just start to embrace a truth that will ultimately make business, life, and everything else much more simple. The BS is I think that we hear work-life balance. You have to have work-life balance or create a separation. And it's almost implicit that who I am here and who I am at home has to be two different people. That's exhausting. I don't know about any of you who have ever tried to do something like brush your teeth while standing on one foot and getting dressed at the same time. It's friggin' hard. And it makes each of those respective tasks way more difficult than it needs to be. Many of us are wildly passionate about the work we do. And so for us to not be that, it's almost like saying, hey, you just can't have this passion piece all the time. Well, why shouldn't we? Many of us are wildly passionate about our families, and we think that we have to shut that off and not be that family person because we need to be so serious at work. Well, why does it have to be that? And where I think vulnerability comes into this is vulnerability is really about risk. Vulnerability is really willing about risking allowing yourself to be seen differently than the facade that you thought you have had to be for so long. So, right, vulnerability is around allowing yourself to take a risk, the risk of being seen as someone different than the facade you think you've had to be for so long. And whether that is how you show up as employees, who you are by your title, unbeknownst to us unconsciously, we all often make decisions that once we have a title, we have a different role, whatever that is, that because we have that title, because we have that different role, we have to start being differently and acting differently. Are there different behaviors that we need to engage with and embody? Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. That's a growth in anything. But it doesn't have to mean that we have to change and become someone we're not. And when this happens, I think this is where we start to get into that really dangerous dichotomy of we feel so pulled away from who we really are. You know, I always say that in extreme examples, the bridge doesn't discriminate against bank accounts. When you're standing at the edge of the bridge and you're really thinking about, wow, how would life end up here? If you're a millionaire, you're a zeroaire, many of us will find ourselves there because we've spent so much of our life trying to be who we think we're supposed to be in these different facets of our life. So in leadership, when we're talking about being vulnerable, it's the person that you see at home as the person you see at work. There might be different behaviors that we engage with, but at the core of who we are, it's the same. So we're not having to walk in and out and put one hat on or the other. We're not having to be this person at home and this person at work. It's all us. And it's the risk of, and ultimately what that risk is really at the deepest level is, will people love me? Will they accept me? Will they see me as being enough? Will I feel like I belong? And it's funny to say that because often in leadership, we attribute that to leading large companies, and we're looking at P&Ls, and we're looking at scaling and all these types of things. But at the emotional core of everything we do, we're all wrestling with those same things.
Yeah.
It's the humanness of all of us, right? And I think that once we are able to embody that as leaders, and we create that space for others to do the same, imagine that. Imagine having a front door at your business where once people walk in, or, you know, since most of us are working remotely right now, where people click in, they're just them. There's no extra energy expended on creating this image, creating this facade and maintaining it and being someone different.
Yeah.
It's just, that's ultimate acceptance, in my opinion.
It's very powerful. And actually, in some ways, the COVID situation has almost forced some vulnerability, right? Because, you know, if we're all remote working, suddenly everybody's seeing your kids in the background, or your dogs, or, you know, just how your house is decorated. I mean, you know, there's only so much you can hide that stuff anymore. And so it's almost forced people to just be themselves on Zoom and show up the way they are, whether it means, you know, sweats on the bottom and nice on the top, you know, whatever.
There was a video that went viral a couple months ago of British Parliament meeting over Zoom. And one of the Parliament members was talking, and, you know, when we take the screenshot of it, their personalities look about as exciting as some of the pictures we see of our political leaders' personalities. But then all of a sudden the cat goes across the keyboard. Right in the middle of a parliamentary session, what you see is all these very serious face-looking individuals start to laugh, start to play, start to relax. And you're watching, you're like, that's the human being. That's them right there, right? That's who they really are.
Right.
But we hide that, and it is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. And you think about how much of our best emotion, our best thoughts, our best essence of who we are is wasted trying to hide who we are so we can be who we think we have to be. And this goes back to that whole idea of zero limits. If you just let the floodgates open with that, and it's one and the same all the time, you know, what is it? There's all these studies now on decision making, and they say the average person has the capacity to make only a finite number of decisions every day, high level decisions. And if some of our very first decisions we're making every day are making decisions to try to be who we're not, or to try to hide a part of ourselves from who we think we have to be for everyone else, that's wasted resources right there.
Yeah. And interesting enough, I mean, sort of the biggest irony, I think, of the whole thing is those foibles or personal, you know, our personal interests are, you know, having our cat, having our dog, having our kids run around in diapers behind us, whatever. That's actually what makes us endearing to other people, right? Those personal aspects of our lives, and those, if you want to call them imperfections, that's not the best word, but you know what I mean? Like we're always trying to project this perfect image, or what we think the perfect image should be. And once people sort of see behind that smoke screen, they're more endeared to us because they're like, oh man, I didn't know that about her, or, oh, that's so cute, or, oh, she has a fun side. I've never seen that before, you know? And suddenly we're more into wanting to know that person and feeling more connected to them. So in our effort to, you know, project this image and be the person we should be, we're actually almost sort of just keeping people at, you know, arm's length. If we can just let them come a little bit closer, our connections are greatly enhanced. And of course that impacts whether you're at the workplace or personal, whatever. I mean, it enhances relationships in all aspects of your life when you can just let people in even a little bit.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So tell me this, because I suffer from it. I will totally admit that I am very much working on vulnerability. I spent many years working in a highly masculine industry, and doing a lot of what you just described, like every day, showing up just like, okay, this is me at work. And then I go home and it's different. In fact, I didn't have a Facebook account for years because of that very reason. Because I didn't want like clients to sort of see my personal life, which in and of itself is kind of ironic because everybody just posts their highlight reels to Facebook, right? But I didn't even want them to see that, Jesse.
Yeah. After
So,
5 filters.
Right,
Yeah.
after 5 filters, exactly. But I didn't even want them to see,
Yeah.
the projected highlight reel of my personal life. So I really separated. And yes, and I didn't realize it at the time, but of course in hindsight, and as I started burning out of that lifestyle, I realized how exhausting it was. But it doesn't mean that I've become really good at vulnerability now. I will still, try to project the image that I think it should be. It doesn't mean I'm fake, but I'm still trying to sort of, show up with what I think life should look like, or what I should be projecting as my image of, whatever it is, the positive leadership movement host, or in my business as a consultant. So what advice would you give to me or listeners who kind of are in a similar boat to me, where they're like, I hear you, I understand the concept intellectually, I want to do it, but man, it's hard. What do I do?
Yeah. I love that. I love that question, Alex. And I appreciate you offering up the example of your personal journey too, because I think that reflects the challenge that most people will face around it. And you mentioned a word about that perfect word. I want to clarify what vulnerability isn't. Vulnerability isn't going and being a sobbing, blubbering mess. It's not sitting around with strumming the banjo, singing "Kumbaya" with your feelings on your sleeve all the time.
Thank goodness, because
Yeah,
I'm not signing up for that. Okay.
yeah, it's definitely not that. And I think that's one of the misperceptions of it, is that we think that what vulnerability is, because just of the nature of it, it's implicit of that. And that seems, and especially in our culture where we take such pride in strength, and we often put strength, and then in such we create a dynamic of strength versus weakness. So in that dynamic, then inevitably we look at vulnerability as being weakness. It's quite the opposite. What vulnerability really is about being authentic to how you're feeling. If you're mad, you're mad. You're sad, you're sad. You're happy, you're happy. You're having fun, you're having fun. What this is about is, it's not about shoving down and turning things on and off. It's about allowing yourself to express. And so we'll use you as an example. And you already acknowledged it, but just to make it clear, when you were doing that and wearing those different hats and going in and being who you thought you had to be, and then coming home and then kind of getting to breathe that sigh of relief from that, how much fun were you having on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being 0 fun, 10 being a lot of fun?
Oh, definitely like in the 0 to 2 range.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I should ask you this first, Alex. What are like your top, on this moment right now, what are your like top 3 to 5 life values, things that are most important to you? And they could be life values, business values. Which ones just pop up, words?
Oh, family, absolutely number 1. My husband, my dogs, they're my family. They absolutely come first. And then it's about integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and actually gratitude. Being grateful for people, being grateful for everything that life brings, good and bad. Those 3 would definitely be my top.
So let's use those 3. And then on a scale of 1 to 10, with the same thing, 1's horrible, 10's amazing. How present and connected did you really feel with your family during that time?
With my husband a lot, but only because he had lived that life too.
So there's a commonality.
There was a commonality. And so he kind of understood that whole, you know, the sort of the dichotomy that I was doing. But at the same time, he was very much encouraging me to, you know, examine what exactly I was doing with my life, because I wasn't that happy. Right. And so he was saying to me, like, look, I mean, you have a lot of success. I get it. But I mean, really, you don't need to keep doing this. Like, and it's killing you and you're not that happy. And so why are you, like, he kept making me kind of self-evaluate. He was helpful in propelling me to make a decision about a life change.
So you two could connect through suffering. There's an understanding of suffering, but he had done it already. And so he loved you enough to try to assuage you from suffering.
Yeah. Thank you. You articulated that much better and more succinctly than I did.
No, and I think this is really important too, because let's just look at that as number one value is family. And the primary source of connection at that time by a family is through suffering. Right now, let's just, hey, Alex, let's pretend you aren't married and you have the opportunity to go on a first date, and I'm going to fix you up and say, hey, Alex, I got your future husband lined up for you. This dude has suffered, and you two are going to form this amazing relationship over suffering. You're ready to meet him. You know, and then that's a simple, easy, dramatized way of saying it. But we
Right.
want to consider these kinds of things, right? Because oftentimes when we put values on family, and I'm betting that if I were to talk to you about the things that you love the most about your husband and your relationship with your husband, your top 5 probably wouldn't be this mutual, mutual understanding of suffering in the corporate world. It'd probably be these other things, much more so, right?
Right.
What were your other two? I'm sorry. What were your other 2 values that you said?
Integrity and gratitude.
Okay, integrity. 1 to 10. How much of integrity did you feel with yourself at that time?
With myself, probably not a lot. I mean, I felt like I've always had a lot of integrity around clients and, you know, doing what I need to do. But in terms of being honest with myself and having integrity with myself, yeah, pretty low.
And then how much in gratitude did you feel at that time?
Not a lot. Not a lot. It was kind of a struggle to see it, actually.
Yeah. Here's what's really interesting. So you're such a great example of this, because you're at a time where the metrics that we use to quantify success, you're killing it in them, right? But then when we start to examine what you really want and what really is most important to you, you're not killing it in those.
Oh no.
Right?
Oh no. And you and I mean, we met actually very close to me leaving that all behind. And I think you'll remember me using the term, I had the golden handcuffs on.
Yes, I do. I remember that conversation vividly. And I remember then we talked about it more after the fact, and we were going on, you were sharing with me. And so this is where I think it's really important, Alex, because you can appreciate so much that one side of the journey because you lived it at such a high level.
Right.
You lived it at such a high level, and you exemplified that I have to keep this part of me kind of put away and compartmentalized to be this person. Now, here's what's really interesting. If we look at integrity, we look at family, we look at gratitude. You were saying that you were very much in integrity with serving your clients, but not with yourself. Now, if you were integrity with yourself, do you think it would increase or decrease your capacity of serving your clients?
I know. You're so right, but I didn't see it at the time.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where we can become blind to that.
Yes. And if you're in a higher state of gratitude for life, for business, everything, would you be more apt at serving or decreasing?
Of
if you
course.
were more, if your work was serving your family piece, but not in a way of there was this connection over suffering, but it was, and it's not just that. I keep coming back to that to make a dramatic example here, but I know there's obviously more to it than that. But you know, if it was allowing it to be, they're fully of service of one another, does it enhance or decrease your ability?
Yeah.
We go in thinking that we need to be not who we are, because who we are is not enough to be who we want to be.
Right.
And it's a fascinating thing, because if we really stop to think about what is most important to us, and if we were to allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to express that fully, this isn't about being kumbaya, rosy posy. Gratitude, integrity, and family isn't about sitting around the campfire banjo strumming. It's about, and sometimes being integrity, I think those are the strongest, most, really our embodiment of what strength is. It's that sometimes it's standing firm when everyone else weans.
Mm-hmm.
When we're able to express that, and we don't have to put a golden handcuff on when we express it, what I would wager is we will be much more profitable, much more passionate, and much more purposeful in what we do vocationally, what we do in our careers, and those other aspects of life that are truly and deeply important to us will be much more enriched and much more fulfilled. And we will not be so friggin' exhausted, stressed out, and anxious transitioning from one to the other, which is where we are now.
Oh, so powerful, Jesse. Thank you. I mean, I love it. And I love the lens you put on that, like examining our values and examining if we're living them. Oh, this has been an amazing, amazing conversation. I could go all day, but I know we have to be mindful of our time. So thank you so much for being here today. And especially, gosh, going so deep on that vulnerability piece. And just, the sort of the theme we've had throughout, which is this, being authentically who we are and showing up in that way, and just the impact we can have, just so powerful today. Thank you. So tell me this, because I know that our listeners are like me, they just want more of you. So how can they get in touch with you, Jesse? Can you tell us how they connect with you? And also, I think you have a cool offer to share with them too, right?
Yeah. And Alex, before that, I want to thank you for being vulnerable, taking the risk, and allowing yourself to be the example there, because that was vulnerability right there. It was you putting yourself out there, being willing to acknowledge these parts of life and business and examining them, and then having a really kind of honest observational perspective on it, and seeing how you could now use that to catapult whatever it is you're doing, and how you could have used it back at that time. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And
Progress.
Yeah, it's huge progress, massive win. And so, I'm online. Everything is just jessebrisendine.com, at jessebrisendine, all those types of things. You'll find me out there. And then, yes, offer. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to extend this. Anybody who finds value in this, you want to chat about it a little bit more, I'm offering a free strategy session. So just shoot me an email. Alex will have my contact information. And what we'll do is we can dive deeper in anything that we covered today, whether it's on leadership, vulnerability, all of the above, none of the above. This is just going to be a cool opportunity for us to play and explore and see where it goes with you. And I would love to have that conversation with you.
Oh, take him up on this offer. That is like a golden opportunity. You just heard him basically coach me on air. So, I mean, you saw how we went there and how much progress was made. So take him up. And you can get connected to Jesse, either, like he said, social, his website, but if you didn't grab his name, just email me questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com, and I will connect you. Because as you can hear from this episode, this guy has gold to share. So, so thank you so much again, Jesse. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. And I want to thank our listeners for joining me for another episode. If you have positive leadership stories to share, you have questions on this topic, or like I said, you want to get connected to Jesse, just write to me at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you. All right, that's it for this week. This is Alex Bratty signing out and promising to be more vulnerable in the coming week, and thanking you, my listeners, for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.